Picture a watchtower on the wall of an ancient Chinese capital. It is the dead of night, and while the city sleeps, a handful of men do not. They are officials of the state, and their job is to watch the sky every single night and write down everything that changes. A new star, a wandering comet, a halo around the moon, nothing is too small to record. Because up there, they believe heaven is speaking, and the message is meant for one man alone, the emperor. There is an old story from the very dawn of Chinese history. Two royal astronomers named Shi and He were charged with keeping watch over the sun and the moon. One day, an eclipse came. The sun went dark in the middle of the day, and the two astronomers failed to predict it. For that failure, the legend says they were put to death. Whether or not it truly happened, the message of the story is unmistakable. In ancient China, watching the sky was not a hobby and it was not philosophy. It was an office of the state, and the stakes were life and death. Over the last few chapters of this journey, we have watched humanity slowly learn to read the heavens. The Mesopotamians recorded the sky on clay tablets and drew the first zodiac. The Babylonians turned those records into calculation, predicting eclipses and planets years in advance. The Egyptians bound the heavens to the life of a whole civilization, and India turned the sky into pure mathematics and stretched that mathematics out to the edge of eternity. Each had asked their own question of the stars. Where are they? When will they move? What is time made of? But there was one question none of them had built their entire government around. Not what the sky predicts about the harvest or the flood, but what the sky says about the man on the throne. That was the question China would take up. And to answer it, they would keep watch on the heavens for longer and more faithfully than any people who has ever lived. To understand Chinese astronomy, you have to understand a single powerful idea, the mandate of heaven. The Chinese believed that the right to rule did not come from bloodline alone or from brute force. It was granted by heaven itself, a cosmic seal of approval given to a just and worthy ruler. The emperor was called the Son of Heaven. He was the one human being who stood between the world above and the world below. His duty was to keep the two in harmony. And here is the crucial part. The mandate was not permanent. If an emperor grew cruel, or corrupt, or weak, heaven could withdraw its blessing, and it would send a warning first. That warning would appear in the sky. A sudden eclipse, a blazing comet, a star that appeared where no star had ever been. To the Chinese court, these were not just curiosities. They were dispatches from heaven, a performance review of the emperor written in starlight. So the sky was not a clock, and it was not an equation. It was a mirror held up to the throne, and someone had to read it every night without fail. This is China's great contribution. Not to predict the heavens, and not to calculate them, but to keep an unbroken watch. To turn astronomy into a permanent arm of the state, staffed, funded, and manned across thousands of years. Where other civilizations left us scattered records, China left us a continuous one, the longest running scientific observation in human history. It began earlier than almost anyone imagines. More than 3,000 years ago, under the Shang dynasty, scribes carved records onto turtle shells and ox bones, the oracle bones. Among the questions burned into that ancient bone, we find eclipses, and we find something even stranger. A note about a great new star blazing beside a familiar one on a night more than 3,000 years ago. That is astronomy older than almost any written record on Earth, and it never stopped. Dynasty after dynasty, the watch was passed down like a sacred duty. Each imperial court kept an official Bureau of Astronomy, a government department whose entire purpose was to observe the sky and interpret it for the ruler. These astronomers were not free thinkers, they were civil servants. And in many periods, studying the heavens privately outside the palace was forbidden. Because knowledge of heaven's messages was power, and power like that belonged to the emperor alone. Look at how they even mapped the sky, and you can see the empire reflected back. While the West divided the heavens by the path of the sun, the Chinese fixed their gaze on the north, on the still point at the top of the sky, around which everything turns. The celestial pole. That unmoving center was the emperor's seat. The stars that circled closest, never setting, never leaving, were his palace and his court. They called that region the purple forbidden enclosure, a heavenly mirror of the forbidden city on earth. The whole sky, in the Chinese imagination, was an empire, a celestial bureaucracy of officials, generals, and ministers, all wheeling in ordered ranks around their sovereign at the pole. To keep this vast watch precise, they built instruments of astonishing sophistication. In the 2nd century, a brilliant polymath named Zhang Heng built an armillary sphere, a nested cage of bronze rings modeling the heavens, and turned it slowly with the steady dripping of water. A mechanical sky, ticking in time with the real one. This was the same Zhang Heng who built the world's first device to detect distant earthquakes. A man who saw the cosmos and the earth as parts of one responsive whole. Centuries later, under the Song dynasty, an official named Shoujing raised something even more extraordinary. A clock tower, more than 10 meters tall, in the city of Kaifeng. Inside, water drove a chain of gears through a device that released their motion one careful step at a time, an escapement, the very heart of every mechanical clock that would follow. Shoujing built it centuries before such clocks appeared in Europe. And that tower did not just tell the time. It turned a giant armillary sphere to track the stars, and rang bells and paraded little figures to mark the hours. A cathedral of gears, keeping pace with the heavens. But the true treasure of Chinese astronomy is not the instruments, it is the record itself. And nothing shows its value more clearly than the guest stars. Every so often, on a clear night, the watchers would see something impossible. A brand new star, flaring to life where there had been only darkness, sometimes bright enough to cast a shadow, sometimes bright enough to be seen in broad daylight. They called these visitors guest stars. And, being diligent officials, they wrote down exactly where they appeared, how bright they were, and how many days they lingered before fading away. In the year 1054, one such guest star appeared in the constellation we call Taurus. The court astronomers recorded that it shone in daylight for 23 days and remained visible in the night sky for nearly 2 years before slowly dimming into nothing. For centuries, that record sat quietly in the archives, until modern astronomers turned their telescopes to that exact spot in the sky. There they found the shredded, glowing wreckage of an exploded star, the Crab Nebula, the debris of a supernova. And thanks to the meticulous Chinese record, we know the precise night it detonated. Almost 1,000 years ago. Much of the rest of the world simply did not write these events down, or dismiss them as omens too frightening to record. China wrote them all down, guest star after guest star, across the centuries. Those ancient notes are not superstition to us now, they are data. Astrophysicists still mine the Chinese chronicles to study how stars die, using observations no living instrument could ever go back and take. And it was not only exploding stars, it was the comets too. The Chinese called them Broom stars, the sweeping stars, and they feared them as brooms come to sweep away the old order. An omen almost always of disaster or a change of rule. But fear did not stop them from measuring. On a piece of silk buried in a tomb more than 2,000 years ago, we find a careful atlas of comets. Dozens of them, each with its own shape of tail, sorted and catalogued like specimens. They tracked one particular comet returning again and again and again across the centuries. The same fiery visitor we now call Halley's Comet. The Chinese records of it reach back more than 2,000 years, one of the longest chains of observation of a single object anywhere on Earth. Where the sky wandered, the Chinese scribe followed, and he wrote it down. Every time. All of this watching served the calendar. And in China, the calendar was not just a way to count days, it was an instrument of power. Each new dynasty would issue its own official calendar. And to accept that calendar, to live by its months and its festivals, was to accept the emperor's authority. To receive the calendar was to bow to the throne. So getting it right was a matter of state. An emperor whose astronomers miscounted the seasons or missed an eclipse looked as though he had lost his grip on heaven itself. That pressure drove real precision. In the 13th century, under the Mongol Yuan dynasty, a master astronomer named Shoujing set out to reform the calendar completely. He built enormous new instruments, including a great gnomon tower that let him measure the length of the year with unprecedented accuracy. His result, called the season-granting calendar, set the length of the year at 365.2425 days. That is the very same figure used by the Gregorian calendar we live by today. And Shoujing reached it 300 years before Europe did. He achieved it not through some new theory of the universe, but through the oldest Chinese strength of all, Careful, patient, relentless observation, backed by the full resources of the state. For the astronomer in this world was never a lonely dreamer. He was an official, and his work had consequences. When he read the sky well, he protected the emperor, warning of danger and confirming the mandate. When he read it badly, or told the throne something it did not want to hear, he could lose his post, or, as the old legend of she and he warned, far more than his post. The sky in China was politics. It was accountability. A ruler who behaved well could point to a calm and ordered heaven as proof of his virtue. And a ruler who oppressed his people lived in dread of the night. A comet might blaze across the sky and give his enemies the sign they had been waiting for. No other civilization tied the fate of its rulers so tightly, and for so long, to the movements of the stars. So, what did China add to humanity's understanding of the sky? Mesopotamia recorded it, Babylon predicted it, Egypt built a civilization around it, India turned it into infinite mathematics. China did something none of them managed. It kept watch. Faithfully, continuously, as an unbroken duty of the state for more than 3,000 years. And in keeping that watch, it left behind a gift no one else could give. A running chronicle of the changing heavens, every guest star that flared and died, every comet that swept across the dark, every eclipse that dimmed the noon. Astronomers rise and fall, and empires with them, but those records survived. And today, when a scientist wants to know when a distant star exploded or how often a comet returns, they still turn to the patient scribes on the wall of an ancient Chinese capital. Men who watched the sky for the sake of an emperor, and, without ever knowing it, kept watch for all of us. China divided its sky into mansions and set the wandering moon marching through them night after night. But it was not the only civilization to carve the heavens into lunar stations. In our next episode, we return to the Indian subcontinent to look closer at a map of the sky woven deep into daily life, the nakshatras, the 27 lunar mansions of the Vedic sky. We will see how these fixed stars became a mandala of time, tying the turning of the moon to the seasons, to the body and its health, and to the exact moment a ritual must begin.